TIFU by trying to impress my friends with a simple cooking recipe, so I've always considered myself to be a pretty decent cook. I've made my fair share of meals, pasta, steaks, stir-fries, but nothing too complicated. I stick to what I know, and I stick to what's easy. However, a couple of weeks ago, I decided I wanted to impress a group of my friends with a fancy meal that was just a little bit beyond my usual culinary range. I'd been hearing all this buzz about how people were making dishes like risotto and homemade pasta, and I figured, why not? I had some basic cooking skills, and this would be the perfect opportunity to show off my skills. So, I chose a recipe for a fancy seafood pasta. It looked delicious, it seemed pretty straightforward, and most importantly, it had an air of sophistication that I thought would wow my friends. I spent a few days getting everything ready, shopping for the ingredients, prepping the kitchen, and most importantly, mentally hyping myself up for the big day. The plan was simple: have my friends over, serve them this amazing dish, and bask in the glow of their compliments. The kind of praise you get when you pull off something difficult and elegant, like a professional chef. The day arrived. I was feeling pretty good, despite a few nerves, but nothing too overwhelming. I'd already researched the recipe multiple times, watched a few YouTube videos, and even practiced a few of the steps. I was ready. I was so ready. I started by gathering all my ingredients: shrimp, scallops, squid, clams, mussels, fresh pasta. Basically, I was making the kind of dish you'd expect from a high-end restaurant, but without any of the professional skills. I had all these fancy herbs, wine, and stock all ready to go. I felt like a master chef just standing in my kitchen surrounded by all the ingredients. I started cooking around 4 p.m. for a 6 p.m. dinner. I figured that'd give me plenty of time to make sure everything was perfect. Little did I know, I was in for an evening that would not only ruin my dinner plans but would also permanently alter the way my friends saw me when it came to cooking. Everything started fine. I got the pasta going, sautéed some garlic, and started preparing the seafood. But then, as I was adding the mussels and clams to the pot, I made a critical error. I didn't realize that I had set the heat too high. The recipe had said to simmer the seafood until it opened up, but I, in my overzealous desire to speed things up, cranked the heat thinking that more heat would make everything cook faster. I wasn't just boiling seafood, I was scorching it. To make matters worse, I didn't properly clean the squid before adding it, and the shrimp were way overcooked before they even had a chance to absorb any of the flavors. My kitchen was starting to smell like something had gone horribly wrong. It wasn't the savory, rich seafood aroma I'd imagined, it was a burnt, fishy stench that made my stomach churn. At this point, I could tell something was off, but I thought I might still be able to salvage the dish. I threw in the white wine, hoping it would mask the burnt smell and bring everything together, but no amount of wine could fix what I had done. The seafood was tough, the pasta was mushy, and everything was swimming in a pool of overcooked broth. I was too deep into the process to turn back, and I figured, hey, it's still edible, right? Maybe it'll taste better than it looks. I plated the dish, trying to make it look presentable. I arranged the seafood artfully on top of the pasta, sprinkled some parsley over it, despite there being no flavor left in the actual dish, and served it up to my friends with a big, confident smile. They were already at the table, chatting away, and I was convinced they were going to be so impressed. One by one, they took their first bites. I could see them chewing, but they didn't say anything at first. It was awkward. Too awkward. Finally, one of my friends broke the silence with a nervous laugh and said, so what exactly is this dish supposed to be? I forced a smile and told them it was a seafood pasta I'd been wanting to try. It's, a bit experimental, I said, trying to sound casual, even though my insides were screaming. They started poking at it, prodding the seafood like it was a strange specimen from another planet. Another friend took a bite, then put down their fork. Hey, no offense, but is this supposed to taste burnt? I could feel my face turning bright red. I tried to play it off. Nah, it's part of the charred flavor. It's supposed to add depth. They all exchanged uncomfortable glances, but one of my more honest friends, you know the type who never holds back, chimed in with, "Dude, this is not good. Like, it's really bad. Did you accidentally burn the seafood?" I'm not exaggerating when I say that I felt like the floor had opened up beneath me. I didn't know what to say. I had built this whole night up in my mind, these plans to wow everyone with my culinary genius, but instead, I had delivered a plate of pure disappointment. But instead of taking the criticism and moving on, I made it worse. I tried to salvage my pride by explaining the intricacies of my cooking process, desperately clinging to the hope that they'd appreciate my effort, even if the dish was a disaster. "I mean, it's all about the technique," I said, my voice trembling. I was going for a more complex flavor profile. You know, some of the burnt stuff is supposed to intensify the taste? They nodded politely, but I could see that none of them were convinced. One friend excused herself to the bathroom, probably to try to escape the awkwardness. A few minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of retching. Needless to say, the dinner went downhill from there. Some of my friends ate a little bit more, trying to be polite, while others discreetly pushed their plates away. The conversation awkwardly shifted away from the food, and eventually, they started making excuses to leave. It was painful. I spent the entire evening trying to act like everything was fine, but inside, I felt like I had just failed in the most spectacular way possible. I ended up throwing most of the food away, which felt like a personal insult to my dignity. The whole night had been a disaster, my cooking was a catastrophe, and my friends were now going to remember me as the guy who couldn't even cook pasta properly. Lesson learned: next time, I'll stick to what I know, and I'll never again try to impress anyone with an overly complicated recipe. Stick to the basics, folks. Trust me. TLDR, tried to impress my friends with a fancy seafood pasta, ended up burning everything and serving a plate of disappointment. My friends were polite but didn't hold back from pointing out how bad it was. Never again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. It all started a few weeks ago when I decided to take my girlfriend on a surprise weekend getaway. I'd been working a lot, and we both needed a break, so I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to treat her to something special. I booked a cabin in the mountains, hoping for a romantic and relaxing retreat. I even went as far as to organize a small itinerary with a bunch of fun activities I thought she would love: hiking, a visit to a local winery, stargazing, and a cozy night by the fireplace. Everything seemed like it was going to be perfect. We packed our bags, got in the car, and set off on the long drive. The drive took a bit longer than I anticipated because I hadn't fully realized how far out into the woods this cabin was. But the scenery was beautiful, and we had a lot of time to chat and listen to music, so it wasn't too bad. When we finally got to the cabin, it was exactly how I pictured it: rustic, charming, with a perfect view of the mountains. The place had everything we needed, or so I thought. The first evening went perfectly. We had dinner at a nearby bistro, came back, made s'mores by the fire pit, and even managed to fit in a nice long walk under the stars. I was feeling pretty proud of myself. My girlfriend seemed genuinely happy, and we were both enjoying the peace and quiet. There was one small issue, though. The cabin had a hot tub on the deck, which I thought would be a fun addition to our getaway. The only problem was that it hadn't been properly cleaned in a while, but I didn't notice this at first. The next morning, I woke up early to make breakfast for her, something I thought would impress her. I scrambled some eggs, made some toast, and even brewed a pot of coffee. We ate out on the deck, surrounded by nature, and I thought it was the perfect way to start the day. Afterward, we headed to the winery, just like I'd planned. But that's when the day started to take a turn for the worse. The winery was beautiful, and we did the usual wine tasting tour. Everything was going well until we got back to the cabin in the afternoon. My girlfriend wanted to try out the hot tub. She had already mentioned it the night before, and I figured it would be a great way to unwind after a day of tasting wines. I didn't realize at that moment that this would be the beginning of my downfall. I started to fill the hot tub, but there was a problem. It took a while for the water to heat up, so I went inside to grab us some towels, thinking we'd have a little bit of time before it was ready. While I was inside, I heard a loud scream from the deck. My heart stopped, and I ran out to see what happened. There, standing by the hot tub, was my girlfriend, looking completely horrified. I rushed over and asked her what was wrong. She pointed at the tub, and when I looked at it, my stomach dropped. The water had turned a murky brown color, with little floating bits that didn't look like they belonged there. My first thought was that it was just some residue from the old tub's plumbing, but that quickly faded when I realized it smelled awful, like stagnant water mixed with something else. I tried to play it cool, explaining that the hot tub probably just needed to be cleaned out a bit more thoroughly. But her expression said it all. She was disgusted. I didn't know what to do. I had already gotten her hopes up for a relaxing soak in the hot tub, and now it looked like I had just brought her to a cabin with a cesspool instead of a luxurious retreat. I told her we could call the management company and have them come clean it, but she wasn't interested in waiting around. She said she was fine with just taking a shower instead. At this point, I was panicking. I didn't want to ruin the whole weekend over one mistake. So I tried to salvage the situation. I suggested we go on a nice hike to clear our heads. Maybe, I thought, we'd come back and the water would be clean by then. We went for a walk, but the whole time, I could feel this weird tension hanging between us. I kept trying to make small talk, but nothing felt right. When we got back, the hot tub was still gross. I decided to bite the bullet and clean it myself, even though I had no idea what I was doing. I spent the next hour draining the water, scrubbing the sides, and hoping that I could somehow fix this mess. My girlfriend had gone inside to relax, but when I came back in to tell her the hot tub was ready, she didn't seem impressed. In fact, she looked a little irritated. I kept telling myself that things would improve, and maybe once we had a quiet dinner and some wine, we could laugh about it. But that didn't happen. By the time we sat down to eat, my girlfriend was visibly upset, and I didn't know how to fix it. She told me she didn't want to pretend everything was okay and that the trip wasn't turning out the way she had imagined. I understood where she was coming from, but it hurt. I felt like everything I had planned had backfired. After dinner, we decided to go stargazing. I figured this would be the perfect end to the day. The skies were clear, and we had a blanket to lie on while we looked up at the stars. But the moment we laid down, she turned to me and said something that made my heart sink. "This trip isn't what I thought it would be. I feel like you were trying too hard, and it's just stressing me out." I didn't know what to say. I apologized and told her that I had really wanted it to be special. She just sighed and said, "Maybe it's just not meant to be." That night, things were awkward. We went to bed early, but the tension was still there. I lay awake, replaying the events in my head, feeling guilty and frustrated. I knew I had messed up, but I wasn't sure how to make it right. The next morning, we packed up and left the cabin early. We didn't really speak much on the way home, and by the time we got back to the city, things were pretty much over. We ended up breaking up the following week. She told me she didn't feel the same way anymore and that the trip had made her realize we were on different paths. So, yeah, that's my TIFU. I tried so hard to create the perfect getaway, and it ended up ruining everything. In hindsight, I should have just kept it simple and not gone overboard with all the romantic ideas. The hot tub fiasco was the tipping point, but there were so many small things along the way that just added up. I've learned my lesson: don't try too hard to impress someone. Sometimes, less is more. And if you're thinking about renting a hot tub in a cabin, maybe check the water before you get in. TIFU by accidentally destroying my best friend's wedding with a disastrous speech. So, this all started last summer when my best friend, Tyler, asked me to be the best man at his wedding. Of course, I was honored, and after all the years of friendship, I knew I couldn't say no. But I wasn't expecting what would unfold over the next few months. To set the stage, Tyler and I have known each other since middle school. We've been through everything together: bad haircuts, prom nights, breakups, and some of the worst decisions you could ever make as teenagers. Our bond was strong, and I thought I knew him better than anyone else. That's why when he asked me to give the best man speech, I immediately said yes. I'd done a few toasts in the past, nothing too serious, but I figured I could handle it. After all, I've known this guy longer than anyone. As the wedding day approached, Tyler seemed to be getting more and more stressed out. He was running around trying to finalize all the details, and I could tell that he was starting to crack under the pressure. I decided to step up and be the calming force he needed. In between helping him pick out the best tux for the big day, I would reassure him that everything was going to be fine. The ceremony would be perfect. I even promised him that I would give a memorable, heartfelt speech. Fast forward to the night before the wedding. Tyler and I were out at a bar, grabbing a couple of drinks to unwind. He kept telling me how nervous he was about the wedding. I could tell that his nerves were getting to him. He was rambling about every little detail, and I tried to reassure him by reminding him that things might go wrong, but in the end, everything would be okay because it was all about celebrating his love with Claire. He seemed to appreciate the pep talk, but I could tell he was still on edge. The next day, on the wedding day, I woke up to a frantic text from Tyler. He had some last-minute problems with the catering, and he needed my help to handle it. I rushed over, did what I could to calm him down, and even took a few photos with him before the ceremony. By the time the ceremony started, I was still feeling a little uneasy. Not because I didn't think I could do the speech, but because I hadn't really prepared anything. I mean, I had a few stories in mind, some funny anecdotes about our friendship, maybe a heartfelt line or two, but I hadn't written anything down. As a person who tends to wing it, I figured I'd be fine. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire looked stunning in her dress, and Tyler looked like the happiest guy alive. As soon as they exchanged their vows, I could tell there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Honestly, I was so touched by the moment that I had to blink back tears. But then, as the ceremony ended and everyone moved toward the reception hall, my nerves hit me like a ton of bricks. I stood up to give my speech. I could hear the murmurs from the crowd, and I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. The nerves took over, and before I even realized it, I started talking. But then I said something I should never have said. Everyone, I've known Tyler for years. And we've been through thick and thin together. So, I'd like to start by saying, when I first met Tyler, I thought he was a little, weird. But I never imagined he'd find someone like Claire. The crowd laughed nervously, unsure of where I was going with this. I quickly added, but seriously, he's always been a great guy, and I'm so happy he found someone as amazing as Claire. In hindsight, I probably should have left it there. But, no. I was trying to be funny. I wanted to entertain the crowd. And so, I continued. I mean, seriously, Claire. When Tyler told me he was getting married, I was like, okay, this is it. He found his one. But I gotta be honest, I wasn't sure if anyone would ever put up with his, quirks. The crowd laughed again, but this time it wasn't the laugh I was hoping for. It was a nervous, uncomfortable kind of laugh. And then, I went on. Like, I always thought the guy was a little socially awkward. But hey, if Claire can love him, then I guess there's hope for all of us, right? Now, at the time, I thought it was a funny jab at Tyler. But as I glanced around, I noticed Claire's face had fallen. She looked hurt. Maybe it was just me, but it felt like I'd crossed a line. My instinct was to stop talking, but instead, I blundered forward. And honestly, Claire, I've seen Tyler go through a lot. But I've never seen him this happy. I've seen him go through some bad relationships. I've seen him struggle. And then you came into his life. You've made him a better man. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. At this point, I was trying to salvage it, but it was too late. I could see Tyler's face now too, his jaw clenched. His cheeks were flushed, but not with happiness. The nervous laughter had died down, replaced by awkward silence. I quickly wrapped up with something generic like, "To Tyler and Claire, may your love grow stronger every day. Cheers." The room was dead silent as I sat back down. The clink of glasses, the awkward shifting in chairs, it was unbearable. I glanced at Tyler, and he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anyone. His face was frozen, like he was in shock. Claire, on the other hand, looked absolutely devastated. It felt like I had taken a sledgehammer to the entire vibe of the wedding. Tyler didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening. And Claire? Well, she barely made eye contact. I tried to apologize to both of them, but every time I attempted, the tension was too thick. It was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. Later that night, Tyler cornered me in the hallway. His voice was low and tight, almost as though he was holding back tears. "Dude, what the hell was that? You made fun of me in front of everyone." "Claire, she didn't find that funny. You crossed a line. You ruined the whole vibe of the night. I thought you were my friend." I had no words. My stomach dropped to my feet and I felt sick. I tried to explain, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't want to hear it. He needed space, and I understood. The rest of the night, I stayed in the background. I felt like an outcast at my best friend's wedding. The next few weeks were strained, with barely any communication between Tyler and me. It took months for me to finally earn back his trust, and even now, things aren't quite the same. I ruined the most important day of his life, and I don't think I'll ever be able to make it up to him. So yeah, that's how I managed to ruin my best friend's wedding with a terrible speech. I'll never forgive myself for making that day about me when it should have been about them. Never again will I try to be funny at someone's expense, especially on such a monumental day. Hopefully, this post serves as a cautionary tale to anyone giving a speech. Prepare and keep it heartfelt. It's not about the jokes, it's about the love. TLDR, ruined my best friend's wedding with a horrible best man speech. Tried to be funny by making awkward jokes about Tyler's quirks and it backfired badly. TIFU by accidentally getting stuck in a customer service call for over 10 hours and completely missing my best friend's wedding. It all started innocently enough. A few months ago, I decided to switch my cell phone carrier. After years of frustration with dropped calls, slow data, and a series of weird billing errors, I figured it was time to make the change. I did my research, chose a new company that promised better service and cheaper rates, and signed up online. Everything was smooth sailing until I received my first bill. I opened it, expecting to see the usual breakdown of charges, but there was something off. The bill was double what it should have been. I checked my plan again, confirmed I'd selected the right options, and tried to contact customer service to figure out what went wrong. The issue seemed straightforward. They had charged me for a plan I didn't sign up for. So, I dialed the customer service number and, as expected, was met with the usual automated system asking me to enter my account number, the reason for my call, and a few other details. No big deal, right? I entered everything correctly and waited. And waited. The recorded message kept looping every few minutes, promising that my call was important and that someone would be with me shortly. Of course, this is when I should have hung up and tried again later. But, because I was in the middle of a hectic week and a bit frazzled from the stress of the billing issue, I decided to wait it out. Hour 1 came and went. I was getting annoyed but told myself it would be worth it once I spoke to someone who could fix this. By hour 2, I was pacing around my apartment, trying to distract myself with random tasks, but the hold music was driving me crazy. At this point, I had resigned myself to the fact that this was going to be a long process. I figured I'd stick it out because, hey, it's not like I had any other pressing plans for the day. I went to make some coffee around the third hour. It was around then that I realized I had missed a few calls and texts. One of them was from my best friend, telling me that her wedding ceremony was starting soon. I had completely forgotten that the event was happening today. Panic set in, but I didn't want to lose my spot in the customer service queue, so I decided to keep holding, convinced I could make it to the reception later. I texted my friend to apologize for being late and promised I'd be there as soon as I could. Hours 4 and 5 rolled by. I began to feel like I was living in some sort of surreal time loop. The same hold music, the same recorded message. By now, my back was sore from standing too long, and I had started to get hungry, but I couldn't bring myself to hang up. The billing issue was getting increasingly important to me, and I was convinced that if I just stayed on the line, someone would finally pick up and solve the problem. It was like a game of patience, and I refused to lose. Around hour 6, I received another message from my friend. She was now asking if I was still coming, as the ceremony was over, and they were about to start with the reception. I felt a knot in my stomach. I quickly responded, apologizing profusely, telling her I was still on the phone with customer service and would be there as soon as I could. I felt terrible for letting her down, but the idea of losing my place in the queue felt like an even worse disaster. By now, I was getting to a point where my body was on autopilot. I had paced every inch of my apartment, I had scrolled through every social media app to kill time, and I was seriously starting to question why I was still holding on. But I couldn't hang up now. The frustration was mounting, but I was stubborn. Then, hour 7 came. My phone buzzed again. It was a group text from the wedding party. Apparently, the cake cutting was happening now, and they were about to dance. My friend asked me if I was okay and if I was still planning to make it, but at this point, I was so far gone that I didn't even know how to respond. I was embarrassed. I'd been on hold for hours, missing the most important event of the day in my best friend's life, and I felt completely helpless. At hour 8, I finally got a little more desperate. I had already tried every trick I could think of to get someone's attention. I even Googled how to escalate a customer service call, but all I could find were endless Reddit threads filled with other people complaining about similar issues. I felt like a prisoner in my own apartment, shackled to this endless loop of hold music. It was during hour 9 that I finally started to lose it. I had been trying to take calls and respond to texts while simultaneously keeping the customer service line open. This is when my phone froze for about 5 minutes, and I thought it was going to die on me. At this point, I was ready to throw my phone out the window, but somehow it rebooted, and to my disbelief, I was still on hold. As the hours went by, I started to notice that I wasn't feeling as hungry anymore. My brain was in survival mode, focusing solely on the goal of getting through to a customer service representative. At hour 10, I was convinced that no one was ever going to pick up. My phone had already been plugged in for hours, and my thumb was cramping from pressing the screen every now and then to make sure I hadn't accidentally disconnected the call. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. At hour 10:30, the music stopped. My heart raced. I was finally connected to a person. I could hear the shuffle of papers on the other end, and then a cheerful voice said, "Hi, thank you for your patience. How can I help you today?" I almost burst into tears. I was so relieved that I barely managed to explain my issue. After about 5 minutes of back and forth, the representative confirmed that there had indeed been an error, and she corrected the billing issue right then and there. I thanked her profusely, though, in all honesty, I was too mentally exhausted to even process the words coming out of my mouth. I hung up, and only then did I realize that I had completely missed the entire wedding, including the reception, dinner, speeches, and dancing. I quickly texted my best friend to apologize again. I explained everything, how I had been stuck on the phone for hours and that I was devastated I couldn't make it. She was surprisingly understanding, but I knew I had let her down. I promised to make it up to her somehow, but I still haven't figured out how. So, yeah, that's how I spent 10 hours on a customer service call and missed my best friend's wedding. Never again will I prioritize a billing error over my friends and family, but I guess I learned that lesson the hard way. The next time I need to switch carriers, I'll make sure to do it during the off-season. Or, I'll just stick with my current service provider forever. TIFU by accidentally setting my best friend's house on fire, and not realizing it until it was almost too late. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. My best friend, Jake, and I had plans to hang out and catch up. We hadn't seen each other much in the last few weeks since he had been busy with work, and I'd been caught up in my own stuff. We decided to meet at his place, a cozy little apartment on the edge of town. Jake lived alone, and his apartment was small but charming, with mismatched furniture, a lot of books, and an overly aggressive plant collection that seemed to take over every available surface. His place had always been a bit of a mess, but in a way that made it feel like home. We were planning on watching some movies, eating junk food, and maybe playing a video game or two, so I showed up in sweatpants with an oversized hoodie. Jake greeted me at the door with a grin and a beer in hand. "About time you showed up," he said, shoving the beer into my hand. "I've been waiting for you to bring over that new horror movie you promised." I laughed, taking a sip of the beer. Yeah. I'm here now. Let's get this party started." We settled on the couch, and after a few minutes of scrolling through Netflix, we agreed on a movie. It was one of those supernatural thrillers that didn't make a lot of sense but had just enough scares to keep you entertained. You know the type, the ones where the characters make decisions so dumb you can't help but yell at the screen. But as we were setting up the movie, I realized I had forgotten something. I had come straight from work, and I didn't have any snacks. No chips, no candy, no microwave popcorn. Nothing. I couldn't let that happen. So I asked Jake if he had anything in his kitchen. Jake, being the culinary genius that he was, sarcasm intended, told me he had a box of instant ramen, a bag of frozen fries, and some frozen chicken tenders. "You can do something with that, right?" he asked, winking at me. I looked over at the tiny kitchen. It was cramped, with just enough space for a microwave, a small fridge, and a stove that hadn't been cleaned in who knows how long. Despite my doubts, I figured I could make it work. Instant ramen sounded fine, and maybe I could throw the fries and chicken tenders in the oven while the movie played. It was going to be a simple meal, but it was better than nothing. I headed into the kitchen, and as I was rummaging through the drawers, I realized I didn't know how to turn the oven on. I mean, it was a pretty standard oven, right? The knobs were the same as every other oven I'd ever seen. But for some reason, I just couldn't get it to work. I twisted the knobs, I pushed buttons, I even checked the breaker box like I was some sort of expert. Nothing. Jake, hearing me mumbling to myself in the kitchen, walked in. "You good?" "Yeah, just trying to figure this thing out," I said, gesturing at the oven. Jake rolled his eyes, then reached over to the counter and grabbed the microwave. "You don't need the oven. Just use this. Trust me, it'll be fine." I wasn't convinced, but I wasn't about to argue with him either. I tossed the frozen fries and chicken tenders in the microwave, put the ramen on the stove, and figured everything would be fine. At this point, I was still fully invested in the movie. Jake and I sat down, and we settled into a comfortable silence while the microwave hummed away in the background. But then things took a turn. The smell. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. Kind of like burnt popcorn mixed with something else. Something slightly smoky. I didn't think much of it. After all, I had only been in the kitchen for a few minutes, and the microwave was still going. But then Jake looked up from his phone. "Is that smoke?" I froze. Smoke? I stood up and turned toward the kitchen, where a small but growing cloud of smoke was indeed billowing out from the microwave. I rushed into the kitchen, my heart pounding. The microwave door was wide open, and the fries and chicken tenders inside were completely blackened. There was no sign of fire, but the smell was so overwhelming that I gagged. The microwave was spitting out little clouds of smoke like an old engine that hadn't been used in years. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. The first thought that came to mind was to grab a towel, wet it, and try to put out whatever fire might have started in the microwave. But before I could even move, Jake appeared behind me, his eyes wide with fear. "Dude, the whole place is smoking." I turned to look around, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The apartment, which had once smelled like pizza and stale air, was now thick with smoke. I couldn't see anything through the haze. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the kitchen. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaky. "Call the fire department." I scrambled to pull my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. But as I looked back, I saw that the smoke wasn't coming from the microwave alone. The smoke had already spread throughout the kitchen and was creeping into the living room. I couldn't understand how the situation had gotten so bad so fast. I could hear sirens in the distance, but I didn't know if it was too late. We needed to get out of there. We bolted out the door and stood in the parking lot, gasping for air, watching as the fire trucks pulled up. I could see flames flickering behind the apartment windows, the yellow glow growing stronger. By the time the firefighters arrived, the whole kitchen was engulfed in flames. They quickly got to work, but it was clear that Jake's apartment had taken a serious hit. The fire was contained to the kitchen, but the smoke damage was everywhere. It felt surreal, standing there in the parking lot, watching as Jake's belongings, his books, his furniture, his plants, were slowly being destroyed by something I had caused. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had burned his food, and it had led to a full-on fire. Jake's face was pale, his eyes glassy with shock. "How could you let this happen?" he asked, his voice quiet. "You were just supposed to make snacks." I couldn't even look at him. The guilt was suffocating. I had ruined everything. His apartment, his favorite things, and the peace we had shared that afternoon. I couldn't believe how something so small, a stupid microwave accident, had escalated into such a disaster. In the end, the fire department managed to put out the flames, but Jake's kitchen was completely destroyed. The apartment was uninhabitable for the next few weeks while repairs were made. He ended up staying with his parents, and I had to help him get everything sorted. Of course, I felt like the worst friend ever, and no amount of apologizing could make it right. Looking back, it's hard to believe how fast everything got out of control. If I hadn't been so careless with the microwave, or if I had just known how to use the oven, none of this would have happened. But in the end, the fire became a symbol of the chaos I created, and I'll never forget the look on Jake's face when he realized that it was all my fault. So, yeah. That's the story of how I accidentally set my best friend's house on fire and almost got us both killed in the process. Moral of the story: don't trust me with anything flammable. Ever. TIFU by accidentally getting a tattoo of my ex's name on my forearm. So, here's the thing. I'm usually pretty careful about decisions that could have permanent consequences. I mean, who isn't? Tattoos are kind of a big deal, and I was always one of those people who would say, "I'll never get a tattoo of someone's name unless it's a family member or a pet." That seemed safe, right? No one would ever think I was an idiot for having Steve or Catherine inked on my skin forever. But, well, today I found out that life has a sense of humor. A really cruel, ironic sense of humor. To backtrack, I recently went through a breakup. A pretty standard one, nothing too dramatic, just a mutual parting of ways. We'd been together for a year and a half, and while it sucked, I thought we'd handled it like two adults. We split on good terms, agreed to keep in touch every now and then, and wished each other the best. Simple. Clean. Done. At the time, I was heartbroken, but I knew I'd be okay. I mean, I've been through breakups before. You get through them, right? You cry a little, you binge watch some Netflix, and then, eventually, you move on. About a month after the breakup, I started to feel better. I even started hanging out with some friends more. One of those friends, Ben, is a guy who's super into tattoos. He has a lot of them, like, a lot. Every time we hung out, he'd talk about tattoos and how great they are. He'd always say, "You should get one, man. It's a great way to express yourself." I wasn't completely sold on the idea, but I had to admit, the idea of getting a tattoo was becoming more and more appealing. So one night, after a few too many drinks, Ben suggested that I get a tattoo to mark the new chapter in my life. I thought it was a great idea. A little impulsive? Sure. But hey, I was feeling pretty good about moving on from my ex and starting fresh. I figured a tattoo could be a symbolic way of showing that I was putting that relationship behind me. "Okay, cool," I said. "Let's do it. But no names. I don't want to be that guy who gets someone's name tattooed on him. That's a disaster waiting to happen." Ben laughed and said, "Of course not. No names. We'll get something simple, meaningful, and permanent. Trust me, I've got the perfect idea for you." So off we went to the local tattoo parlor, where Ben had a few friends who worked. The atmosphere was pretty chill. It was one of those places with dim lighting, rock music playing in the background, and a bunch of tattooed people just hanging around. It wasn't my usual scene, but I was feeling adventurous. I sat in the chair, and Ben told me to relax. He pulled up some designs on his phone, all while talking about how this tattoo would be a new symbol of my independence. A fresh start. I loved the idea. I was getting a tattoo to show the world that I was moving on from my past relationship and becoming a new person. Ben eventually settled on a design. It was a minimalist compass, meant to represent finding your true direction in life. I thought it looked pretty cool. It wasn't too big or flashy, and it seemed perfect for this new phase of my life. The tattoo artist, a guy named Kyle, was super chill. He was clearly an expert, so I felt pretty comfortable with him. We went through the design, and I confirmed that I wanted it on my forearm. It was going to be a small, simple piece, nothing too overwhelming. Here's where things took a turn. As Kyle started to work on my tattoo, I began chatting with Ben about the whole breakup. I mentioned how weird it was that I was still adjusting to being single. It wasn't like we had an explosive breakup or anything, but it still stung a little. We talked about relationships, how people change, and how sometimes you have to let go of things to grow. And during this conversation, Ben, for whatever reason, casually brought up my ex. "Yeah, man, I remember you and Sarah. You guys seemed pretty solid. What happened, though? She was good for you, right?" Ben asked, completely nonchalantly. Sarah was my ex. My brain froze. Of course, I hadn't thought about her in weeks, but hearing her name brought up something inside me. It was like a little knot in my stomach. But instead of processing the emotions, I just brushed it off. "Yeah, she was great. We just grew apart, you know?" Ben nodded, but Kyle, who was doing the tattoo, was still focused on his work. I thought nothing of it. I was talking to Ben about my ex, but I didn't think anything was out of the ordinary. Kyle finished the outline and started to fill in the black ink. Everything was going well. But about halfway through, Ben mentioned, "Man, this is going to be so symbolic. A fresh start, like a whole new chapter. You can show it off to your next girlfriend. It'll be a great conversation piece." I laughed nervously. Yeah, definitely. No more thinking about the past. This tattoo is about moving forward. As Kyle worked, I felt this strange sense of finality, like a shift in my perspective. My ex was just a chapter in my life, right? Nothing I needed to dwell on forever. After about an hour, Kyle finished the tattoo. I looked down at my forearm, admiring the sleek, sharp lines of the compass. It looked great. I felt accomplished. I had a tattoo now. It felt like a physical reminder of growth. But then, as I got up to leave, something caught my eye. The compass, which was supposed to symbolize direction and new beginnings, had something written beneath it. In tiny, elegant script. I squinted, barely able to read the text. It said, Sarah. I stared at it for what felt like forever, my heart dropping into my stomach. Dude, what the hell is this? I stammered. Ben was already at the counter, paying, but he turned around when I said something. He looked at the tattoo, then back at me. Oh, yeah. I thought it'd be a nice touch. A little dedication to your ex, you know? It's your way of acknowledging the past but moving on. Symbolic. My brain short-circuited. What? You put her name on me? Ben didn't get why I was freaking out. It's not like you're keeping her. It's just a little homage to the past. No big deal. No big deal? I now had my ex's name permanently inked on my body, right on my forearm, where everyone could see it. I spent the rest of the night in a mix of disbelief and fury. I couldn't even think straight. I was so angry at Ben for being so thoughtless, and at myself for not paying more attention while they were doing the tattoo. How had I let this happen? The worst part? I had no idea how to explain it to anyone. How do you tell people that you got a tattoo of your ex's name by accident? Oh, it's not that bad. It's just a symbol of moving on. Yeah, right. Everyone would know exactly what it meant. So, now I'm stuck with this constant reminder of someone I'm trying to forget. I'm considering getting it covered up, but I'm not sure how that'll work. I guess I'll have to live with this mistake forever, and next time, I'll definitely be more careful about letting my friends pick out tattoos for me. TLDR, got a tattoo to symbolize moving on from my ex, and my friend decided to add her name under the design as a symbolic homage. Now I have her name permanently on my forearm and have no idea how to explain it to people. TIFU by accidentally getting adopted by a rich family while trying to return a lost dog. So this happened last summer, and I still wake up in a cold sweat some nights thinking about it. I, 24M, had just moved to a new city for a job, nothing glamorous, just some mid-tier IT support role, but it paid okay and I needed a change. I didn't know anyone in town and was still getting used to the neighborhoods, the public transport, the way everyone here honks 5 times more than necessary. One Saturday, I decided to walk around the fancy part of the city to gawk at the giant houses I'd never afford. I had a coffee, a podcast in my ears, and I was just strolling when I saw this absolute unit of a golden retriever bounding down the sidewalk, clearly on a mission. No leash, no owner in sight. I'm a sucker for dogs, and I didn't want this one to get hit by a car, so I called out and crouched. The dog beelined to me like we were long-lost friends. It was wearing a collar with a gold-engraved name tag. Of course its name was Bentley. I called the number on the tag, and a woman with the most soothing voice answered. I told her I had Bentley, and she sounded so relieved she almost cried. She gave me an address just a few blocks away, and said she'd be waiting outside. Here's where the chaos starts. I get to the address, and this place looks like a museum. Iron gates, manicured hedges, actual statues. The woman waiting outside looked like she walked off the set of Succession. Blonde, elegant, wearing some flowing silk robe like it was 10 a.m. in Monaco. She runs up, hugs Bentley, and before I can say anything else, she hugs me. You must be Matthew, she says. My name is not Matthew. But I've always had this stupid thing where I freeze up in awkward situations. So I just kind of smile. She starts thanking me profusely and says, "Your father's going to be thrilled." Before I can correct her, a butler, yes, really, opens the gate, and we're ushered inside. I'm trying to explain I'm not Matthew, just a dog rescuer, but no one is listening. They're all caught up in the drama. A man in his 60s storms into the marble foyer and yells, "Where the hell have you been, Matt?" Then he sees me and pulls me into a bear hug. I mutter, "Actually," but he cuts me off, saying something about how I look just like my mother, rest her soul. At this point, I'm thinking maybe Matthew is a distant cousin or estranged son. I'm still trying to get a word in, but then a maid literally hands me a mimosa and starts wiping dog hair off my shirt like I live there. Now, you're probably wondering, why didn't I just say something? Great question. I ask myself that all the time. But imagine you're suddenly surrounded by an incredibly wealthy family, all crying and hugging you, thanking you for coming home. It was like I stepped into a Netflix drama. It was overwhelming and, yeah, a little flattering. I kept thinking, I'll explain in 5 minutes, I just need to find the right moment. That moment did not come. Instead, I was led to the backyard patio where brunch was being served. A literal harpist was playing. A French chef was serving eggs Benedict on silver platters. I was seated at the head of the table next to the dad, whose name was Charles. He starts reminiscing about our summer trips to Nantucket and how I used to cry when the boat horn blew. I had never been on a boat in my life. At one point, Charles starts tearing up, saying, "After your mother passed, I didn't know how to be a father. I failed you. But seeing you here now, I want to fix this. I want to know my son." I wanted to say, "Sir, I'm not your son. I found your dog," but someone refilled my mimosa and offered me a lobster tail, and my brain short-circuited. I just nodded like a jackass. It gets worse. They insisted I stay for the weekend. I tried to decline, but Charles looked heartbroken, and the woman, her name was Elise, said, "Please, Matthew, just let us have a few days with you." I didn't know how to explain that I was just a guy who returned a dog and got mistaken for someone else, so I agreed. I texted my boss saying I had a family emergency and wouldn't be in Monday. By Saturday night, I was in a $900 bathrobe eating caviar on a private balcony. They showed me my old room, which was bigger than my apartment and had been preserved like a museum exhibit. I played along. I pretended to recognize toys and posters. They started asking about my life, and I said vague things like, "It's been a journey, and I've been doing some soul-searching." Sunday morning, a woman about my age shows up. Dark hair, sharp eyes, wearing a tailored blazer like she means business. She looks at me and goes pale. "You're not Matthew," she says flatly. Everyone at the table goes dead silent. This woman, turns out her name is Genevieve and she's Matthew's actual sister, starts grilling me. Where was I born? What's our childhood dog's name? What school did we go to? I break. I spill everything. I tell them I just found Bentley on the street, called the number, and then got swept up in this weird real-life soap opera. I apologized a dozen times. I even offered to pay for the bathrobe and the lobster tail. Charles just sits there, expressionless, while Elise starts crying. Genevieve is furious. She keeps calling me a conman, a scam artist, a lunatic. She threatens to call the police. But Charles, God bless him, starts laughing. This deep, booming laugh like he hadn't laughed in years. He waves everyone quiet and says, "This is the most exciting thing that's happened to us in a decade." He makes me stay for lunch. Genevieve storms off. Elise warms up slightly, but only after 2 glasses of wine. They ended up driving me home Sunday night in a Bentley, the car, not the dog, with a gift basket full of wine and cheese and a handwritten note from Charles that said, "Thank you for the best weekend of my life." I never saw them again. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder where the real Matthew is. And what he'd think if he knew I was the son his dad always wanted, for one weird, mimosa-filled weekend. TIFU by trying to fix my clogged sink with a shop vac and flooding my neighbor's apartment, getting arrested, and almost setting off a building-wide hazmat response. Let me paint the picture. I live in a semi-decent apartment in a city that prides itself on being up-and-coming, which is code for gentrification, overpriced rent, and plumbing from the Truman era. The kind of building where the walls are paper-thin, the neighbors are either aggressively friendly or weirdly elusive, and maintenance takes 6 business months to fix anything. Last Friday, my kitchen sink started draining slower than a hungover sloth. I noticed it when I was doing dishes after dinner, and the water just sat there, like it had paid rent. I tried the usual fixes, boiling water, baking soda, and vinegar, swearing at it. Nada. It was late, I was tired, and figured I'd deal with it in the morning. Saturday morning, it was worse. The water had drained, but only because it had leaked through the cabinet below and pooled onto the floor. Cue panic. I threw down towels, emptied the cabinet, and stared at the mess like it would apologize. I texted my landlord, who replied 4 hours later with, "I'll have someone come by on Tuesday." No name, no time, just vibes. So naturally, I turned to Reddit. One post suggested using a wet/dry shop vac to suck out the clog through the drain. I had a shop vac in my closet from my short-lived "I'll renovate furniture for a side hustle" phase. I grabbed it, lined the hose up with the drain, and turned that bad boy on high. Now, what I didn't realize was that apartment plumbing is like an angry octopus of interlinked sadness. Apparently, the clog was not in the U-bend under my sink but somewhere deeper in the shared pipe system. The moment I flipped on the shop vac, I heard a wet gurgling sound that could only be described as intestinal. The hose twitched like it was alive, and the next thing I knew, a black wave of horror shot up from the drain and into the vacuum. It smelled like every bad decision in the history of mankind. Still, I felt victorious. Stuff was moving. The shop vac was doing its job. I emptied it once into a bucket that looked like the devil's coffee and went for round 2. That's when I heard banging. At first I thought it was the pipes. But no, it was my downstairs neighbor, an older woman named Margaret, who I'd only spoken to once when she yelled at me for dropping my keys too loud. She was screaming something about flooding and "my Jesus candles are ruined." I ran downstairs to find her apartment door open and a small river cascading through her hallway. Her kitchen looked like a murder scene, but instead of blood, it was raw sewage. Her rugs were floating. The air smelled like betrayal. Apparently, the clog had been further down the line, and my shop vac had not so much sucked it out as it had displaced it into her sink, which then overflowed dramatically. She was crying. I tried to help clean up, but every time I touched something, she swatted me away with a wet dish rag. She called the fire department. I tried to explain to them that I was just trying to help, but things escalated when they asked me what was in the shop vac. I showed them the bucket of black goo. One of them recoiled and said, "We might need hazmat." Cue me panicking. I insisted it was just gunk. He radioed it in anyway. Then the police showed up. Not a huge deal, right? I mean, I hadn't done anything illegal, except maybe inadvertently biohazard my neighbor's home. They asked me a lot of questions, took a look at the shop vac, and then informed me that because I had forcibly tampered with plumbing in a multi-unit building and caused property damage, I could be looking at fines or worse. I kept trying to say I was just cleaning my own damn sink, but they weren't having it. I was handcuffed, lightly, and walked outside just in time for 3 of my neighbors to see me and gasp like I'd been caught with bodies in my freezer. They took me in, mostly for paperwork and to scare the crap out of me. They let me out after a few hours once it was clear I hadn't maliciously tried to poison anyone, and the hazmat team determined that the sludge wasn't toxic, just repulsively organic. One of the officers even gave me a ride back and told me to stick to Drano next time. When I got back, my landlord had finally shown up. He just shook his head at me and said, "You're not getting your deposit back." Fair. But it doesn't end there. Sunday morning, I got a knock on the door. It was Margaret. I braced myself for a slap, a lawsuit, or both. But instead, she handed me a Tupperware of cookies and said, "I'm still furious, but you looked like a sad little boy being arrested last night." We sat awkwardly at my kitchen table, her surrounded by faint whiffs of bleach, me trying to pretend I hadn't ruined her prayer corner. She told me about her kids, I told her about my stupid shop vac idea, and for a moment, it felt human. Then she asked if I still had the vacuum. I said yes. She said, "Good. I think my toilet's acting up." And that's the story of how I tried to fix a sink and ended up flooding an apartment, getting arrested, and earning the unlikely friendship of an elderly woman who now calls me her disaster boy. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by wearing noise-canceling headphones during my wife's surprise birthday party. This happened about a month ago, and I'm only just recovering from the social whiplash. Let me paint the picture. I work from home as a software engineer. I'm in meetings most of the day, writing code, squashing bugs, and trying not to go crazy in my chair. To stay focused, I use a pair of industrial-strength noise-canceling headphones, the kind that could muffle a chainsaw during a war zone. They're my Zen cocoon. I love them more than some distant relatives. So, a few weeks ago, it was my wife Emma's 30th birthday. Leading up to it, I'd been under the impression that we were going to have a quiet dinner, just the two of us. She had been oddly low-key about the whole thing, brushing it off whenever I asked. I even offered to take her on a weekend getaway, but she told me she wanted to keep it simple this year. Okay. Cool. Simple is my middle name. Little did I know, this was a complete smokescreen. What Emma had actually done was orchestrate a surprise party, for herself, and invited over 40 people to our house. She just needed me out of the way long enough to get everything prepped. Apparently, she even told our friends to not expect much help from me because I'm oblivious when I'm in work mode. This turned out to be a painfully accurate forecast. The day of the party, I was home all day, a Wednesday. I had back-to-back meetings and was finalizing a deployment that had been postponed 3 times. I told Emma I'd be off the grid for most of the day. She smiled and said that was fine, and she had some errands to run anyway. Around noon, I locked myself in the home office with my headphones on, fully immersed in code, audiobooks, and a strange Polish EDM playlist that had wormed its way into my daily routine. I was laser-focused. I had no idea that, just downstairs, an entire team of friends and family was transforming our house into Party Central. They brought in balloons, banners, a chocolate fountain, rented lights, 2 kegs, and even a DJ setup. It was like the wedding reception we never had, in our own damn living room. Every now and then, I thought I heard something, but chalked it up to neighbors or distant thunder or perhaps my stomach. Around 6:30 p.m., Emma texted me, "Babe, can you come down and help me carry something from the garage?" I glanced at the clock and figured I could take a break. I took off my headphones and noticed for the first time that the house was oddly quiet. Still, I didn't think much of it. I walked downstairs like a man emerging from a time capsule, completely unaware that I was walking into the biggest event our house had ever hosted. As I turned the corner into the living room, 40 people jumped out and screamed, "Surprise!" I screamed back. Like, really screamed. Not a polite startled noise. I shrieked like someone had pulled a ghost out of my spinal cord. I staggered backward, tripped over my own foot, and landed flat on my back, knocking over a table full of appetizers. Everyone went silent. Emma rushed over, half laughing, half mortified. My first words were, "What the hell is happening?" She looked down at me and said, "Happy birthday to me?" I had never felt so clueless in my life. It was like I had teleported into someone else's life. There were banners with her name on them, people holding drinks, music starting up again, and I was lying on the floor surrounded by shrimp cocktail and shattered pretzel platters. But it gets worse. Apparently, I had missed several warning signs throughout the day. Our neighbor had borrowed our folding chairs for a backyard barbecue, which I authorized via text without thinking. A florist had come by and dropped off a bouquet that I shoved on the counter without reading the card. Even the DJ had asked me, when I went to the kitchen for water, "Hey man, where should I set up?" To which I absent-mindedly replied, "Anywhere but the hallway." I thought he was the new cable guy. I even asked him if he could look at our router. The whole party was surreal. Once I got over the shock and wiped cheese dip off my shirt, I tried to mingle. People thought I was doing some sort of comedy bit, the clueless husband act. I heard someone say, he's really committed to the character. Nope. No character. Just 100% organic confusion. At one point, my mother-in-law pulled me aside and whispered, "You really didn't know," as if I had committed some kind of emotional crime. When I said no, she gave me the kind of smile you'd give a puppy that peed on the carpet. To make matters worse, Emma gave a toast halfway through. She said, "Thanks to all of you for coming, and special thanks to my wonderful husband for letting this all happen under his roof." Everyone laughed. I smiled. I was dying inside. Eventually, the party wound down. People left. Emma and I cleaned up around 1 a.m. That's when she finally said, "You know, I wasn't actually mad. I just forgot how deep you go into work mode. It's kind of impressive. Also, terrifying." We laughed, but I made a mental note to never trust a quiet birthday request again. I now keep one ear uncovered whenever I wear those headphones, just in case a marching band comes through or a circus sets up in the basement. But the kicker? The next day, I found a note taped to the inside of the fridge from Emma that said, "Just in case you read this before noticing 40 people in our house, surprise." I never saw it. TIFU by accidentally joining a cult while trying to impress a girl. So this happened about a year ago, but I only recently gathered the emotional strength to admit it out loud. I was a fresh college graduate, mid-20s, underemployed, and still reeling from a recent breakup that left me questioning most of my life decisions. I'd moved to a new city to start fresh, which meant I spent a lot of time in coffee shops pretending to apply for jobs while actually scrolling Reddit and contemplating my mistakes. One fateful Thursday, I was at this very hipster Y coffee shop, all exposed brick, plants in macrame hangers, overpriced pour-over coffee, when I saw her. Let's call her Elise. She was in a corner seat, sketching in a worn notebook, and sipping what I can only assume was some herbal tea with a name like Forest Moon. She had that effortless artsy look, like she just woke up in a field of sunflowers and decided to be better than the rest of us. Anyway, we exchanged a few glances, and I finally worked up the nerve to comment on her drawing, something vague and non-threatening like, "That's really cool. Do you sell your art?" She looked up, surprised but not annoyed, and we actually started talking. Turns out she was part of a local art collective and invited me to one of their community events. I wasn't sure if that was a date or not, but it sounded cool, and more importantly, it sounded like an opportunity to maybe hold hands with someone who burned incense unironically. The event was the next night. I showed up wearing my most neutral outfit, you know, the one that says "I'm chill but interesting," and was surprised to find it wasn't in a gallery or studio, but in what looked like a repurposed warehouse on the outskirts of the city. There were about 30 people there, some barefoot, some wearing long flowing garments, and almost all sipping from identical clay mugs. There was incense, of course. So much incense. Elise greeted me warmly, gave me a hug that lasted 2 seconds longer than a normal hug, and handed me a mug of what she called root tea. It tasted like dirt and regret, but I drank it because I didn't want to seem square. She introduced me to a few people, all with names like River, Soul, and Juniper. They talked about energetic alignment, communal consciousness, and something called the Great Returning. I nodded like I understood any of it. Then came the circle. Everyone sat in a huge circle on the floor, holding hands. A guy named Thorn, of course his name was Thorn, led us in a guided meditation, then spoke for about 15 minutes on the dismantling of ego and reconnection with the cosmic self. I tried to follow along but mostly sat there wondering if I had just joined a yoga class or an audition for a Netflix docuseries. After the circle, people started chanting. Some stood, others swayed or danced. Elise grabbed my hand and pulled me into the center, spinning me around like we were in some kind of transcendental square dance. I laughed nervously, trying to match the energy while also praying this wouldn't end in someone offering me a crystal and a contract. The night ended with everyone lying on the floor in silence for 10 full minutes. I wish I was exaggerating. When I left, Elise hugged me again, deeper this time, and said, "Your aura's shifting. I can feel it." Now, a normal person might have chalked this up to a weird night and moved on. But I wasn't normal, I was lonely, and she smelled like lavender and hope. So I went again the next week. And the next. I got used to the tea. I started reading the little pamphlets they handed out. I even bought a white linen tunic from a thrift store because it breathed better during drum circles. About a month in, someone handed me a book called The Axis Within and said it opened portals. I took it home and I'll admit, I got sucked in. It was full of pseudo-philosophical ramblings about energy, collective memory, and spiritual reawakening. By week 6, I was using phrases like soul resonance in casual conversation and had unironically begun talking about my past lives. Then came the weekend retreat. Elise told me they were holding a 3-day immersion in the woods. No phones, no internet, just the group and nature. It sounded a bit intense, but I was in too deep to question it. Plus, Elise said she'd never felt closer to someone than she did to me, and that if I came, she'd share something profound. We drove 3 hours into the forest and arrived at a camp that looked straight out of a horror movie, cabins made of raw wood, no electricity, and a central fire pit. The first day was fine, yoga, singing, communal meals. Day 2 got weird. We fasted. We meditated for hours. At one point, we took something called Vision Root, not technically illegal, but absolutely not FDA approved. That night, I saw colors that don't exist and had a 2-hour conversation with a tree. I cried because it told me I was worthy of love. On day 3, Thorn announced it was time to bind ourselves to the path. I thought that was a metaphor. It wasn't. They led us to a clearing, where everyone was handed a rope. Elise looked radiant and intense, like she was floating. Thorn instructed us to tie our wrists together, one to another, forming a human chain. "Let go of yourself," he said. "You are no longer alone. We are one." And then, they branded us. Okay, not with fire. But with henna. Everyone got the same symbol on their forearm, an abstract spiral thing meant to represent the vortex of awakening. They chanted while it was applied. I tried to act like this was all chill, but internally I was like, what the F \******* am I doing? That night, I broke. I sat by the fire, thinking about my student loans, my mom, and the fact that I hadn't eaten a cheeseburger in almost 4 days. Elise was asleep in a hammock, her spiral tattoo glowing in the firelight, and I realized, I don't believe in any of this. I wasn't transforming. I wasn't awakening. I was just a desperate dude who wanted someone to think he was interesting enough to love. I faked a stomach bug and told them I had to leave early. Thorn gave me a cleansing hug. Elise kissed me on the forehead and said, "Don't forget who you are now." I nodded and drove back to the city blasting angry punk music to reassert my identity. When I got home, I deleted her number, threw away the tunic, and ate a bacon cheeseburger like a man coming back from war. I still have the spiral mark on my arm and faded henna in one old photo. Every now and then I look at it to remind myself, do not follow the pretty girl into the woods. TIFU by accidentally submitting my browser history instead of my final exam. This happened about 6 months ago, but I still get a cold sweat when I think about it. I was taking an advanced programming class at my university, one of those nightmare courses with a reputation for wrecking GPAs and turning confident comp-sci students into disheveled caffeine goblins. The final exam was 40% of the grade, take-home style, timed for 4 hours, and we had to upload our completed solution as a PDF to the university's submission portal. Now, I'm not exactly a last-minute person, but life had been a mess leading up to the final. I'd had 2 other finals, a project due, and a breakup with my girlfriend of 2 years, all in the same week. I was mentally fried. The day of the final, I took it seriously, sat down with snacks, water, and my IDE open. I worked my ass off for 4 hours, debugging edge cases and making sure the program did exactly what it was supposed to. I wrote my explanations in a separate document, double-checked everything, and finally exported the whole thing as a PDF. Or at least I thought I did. Here's where the real screw-up begins. I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and I also have about 60 tabs open at any given time. I was juggling between a few Chrome windows, one with the exam, one with Stack Overflow, one with Discord where a few classmates were in panic mode. In the chaos of wrapping up and rushing to submit, I had accidentally dragged a Chrome tab into my Word window. Apparently, that specific tab was my browser history. You might ask, how does one drag a Chrome tab into Word? Answer, poorly. What actually happened was I had clicked on a link inside a Google Doc, a reference site, which opened in a new tab. I copy-pasted some of the text as a reference, and then somehow, when trying to paste in the last bit of code into my final exam document, I Ctrl+Shift+VD my entire browser history page, neatly formatted in Word as a hyperlink list. I didn't notice. I was in such a rush that I exported it to PDF and uploaded it immediately. The submission portal gives you exactly one upload. No edits. No second chances. I clicked submit and went to make celebratory ramen, exhausted but relieved. 2 days later, I get an email from my professor. Please see me regarding your final exam submission. It appears to be incomplete. Cue internal screaming. I go to his office hours the next day, praying it's just a formatting issue or a broken PDF. The guy looks at me over his glasses with the kind of disappointment usually reserved for cheating scandals or dogs that ate important documents. He spins his laptop around. There it is, a beautifully formatted PDF. The cover page with my name and student ID. The exam title. A half-page explanation of my code logic. Then, nothing but 14 pages of browser history. Pages of history. Each entry a clickable blue hyperlink. How to loop in Python efficiently, how to fix memory leak C++, cat screaming meme, does pizza expire, can I eat 3-day-old sushi, what is emotional cheating, how to get over a breakup fast, do dogs know when you're sad, and, for some reason, what's the difference between shrimp and prawns? He's staring at me. I am staring at the floor, contemplating vaporization. He says, I'm going to give you a chance to resubmit because I believe this was an honest mistake. But in the future, check your files. Twice. I leave, my heart pounding, and call my best friend to tell them what happened. They laugh for a full 3 minutes before asking me to send them a screenshot. I refuse. But the damage was done. What I didn't know is that someone in my class had overheard the professor mention browser history while I was in his office. That someone started a rumor that I submitted porn links instead of my final exam. By the end of the week, someone had photoshopped a fake PDF of hornyhistoryfinal.pdf and circulated it on our class Discord. My actual submission didn't have anything like that, but I had zero credibility. I was now that guy. The browser history guy. Someone printed a screenshot from the fake PDF and taped it to the wall of the CompSci building under the heading Computer Science. Explore your interests. Worse, this story made it to one of the department events, a casual student Q/ANDA with alumni. A senior who'd already graduated asked if the browser history legend was real. I wanted to die. So yeah. I did get to resubmit, and I ended up passing the class with a B+. My professor, bless him, never brought it up again. But I know he remembers. We both do. And to this day, every time I export a PDF, I double-check it like it's a bomb wire and I'm diffusing it in front of a live audience. TIFU by accidentally starting a neighborhood poop cult. Let me preface this by saying I live in what's supposed to be a nice suburban neighborhood. It has HOA rules, people who care way too much about their lawns, and a Facebook group where drama brews faster than coffee in a break room. I moved here about a year ago, single guy, mid-30s, working remote. I mostly keep to myself. But all of that changed because of my dog. Or more accurately, because of my dog's poop. I have a golden retriever named Baxter. Sweetest dog in the world, a little dumb, very food motivated. I walk him twice a day, and like a responsible adult, I bring poop bags, clean up after him, and toss it in my trash can when we get home. This is, apparently, not the norm in my neighborhood. It started with a post in the HOA Facebook group. Someone posted a blurry picture of dog poop on their lawn, followed by an all-caps rant titled "Who let their dog defecate on my azaleas?" It got 63 comments in an hour. People were pointing fingers, posting doorbell cam footage of random dogs, speculating like it was a crime documentary. I watched with popcorn in hand. Honestly, it was the most excitement I'd seen in months. Fast forward 2 days. I'm walking Baxter early in the morning, earbuds in, coffee in hand, when he stops to do his business. I bag it, as usual, but the public trash bin on our usual route was overflowing. So I carried the bag back home. Apparently, someone across the street filmed me holding the poop bag but not throwing it away right away, and decided this meant I was the phantom pooper. Hugh Facebook post number 2, dog man identified with a zoomed-in shot of me mid-yawn, holding a green poop bag like it was a trophy. I tried to defend myself in the comments. That's me. I cleaned it up. I carried it home. But it was too late. I was branded. I thought it would blow over, but then came the poop flags. The next morning, I walked Baxter and noticed a little orange flag planted where he'd pooped the day before. It said Poop Zone Number 3, offender under surveillance. At first I laughed. Then I noticed there were more flags, like, a lot more, sprouting up in different lawns around the block, color-coded and numbered. Someone had started mapping them. And then came the spreadsheet. A new Facebook group formed, Citizens Against Irresponsible Dog Owners, or CATO for short. Someone, I suspect Linda from down the street, was maintaining a Google sheet of poop incidents, complete with timestamps, bag color, dog breed, and even a suspect rating. I had a July 5th, 10. Someone named Cheryl had an 8.9. This was hilarious. For about a week. Then my mailbox got poop in it. I don't mean a bag of poop. I mean a naked, steaming pile, right in the mailbox, no note. I reported it to the HOA, who claimed they didn't condone vigilante action, but also encouraged residents to keep the neighborhood clean. So I snapped. I made a fake poop. I took an old yoga mat, brown fabric dye, and some oatmeal, and crafted the most grotesque fake dog turd I could muster. I put it in a box, covered it in glitter and perfume, and wrote to Linda, "Hope this brings you closure, Dogman," on the card. I left it on her porch at 4 a.m. By 8 a.m., the Facebook group had exploded. People were arguing whether it was an actual threat or some kind of modern art statement. Someone suggested I was starting a fecal resistance movement. Another person said, "Honestly, this guy has a point, Linda is being a tyrant." A meme war broke out. Team Dogman versus Team Cato. That weekend, it escalated into what I can only describe as a turf war. Some people began walking their dogs in packs, carrying signs like "Dogs poop, people scoop, let it go." Others set up motion sensors and floodlights, creating literal minefields of light across their lawns. Someone printed t-shirts with my blurry yawn photo and the caption "Justice for Dogman." I didn't even make them. They just appeared. People started holding poop patrol walks at night, armed with flashlights and whistles. A few of them even had drones. It was like a suburban version of Blade Runner, but instead of replicants, they were hunting dogs mid-squat. And then Channel 6 News picked it up. I didn't want to be on TV. I didn't want this to be my legacy. But the moment I saw a news van on the corner, I knew it was over. I did the interview anonymously, hoodie up, face blurred, voice altered. I told them, I just want people to stop acting like dog poop is a moral failing. It's a bodily function. We clean it up. We move on. Some people rallied. Others doubled down. Someone created a poop tracker app that geotagged hotspots. Linda was given an award at the HOA meeting for exemplary lawn vigilance. And me? I became a weird kind of legend. People started inviting me to neighborhood BBQs as long as I didn't bring a bag. One guy gave me a mug that said #OnePublicEnemy, Pet Division. I even got a Tinder match who said, I like a man who takes a stand, even if it's about feces. Eventually, things calmed down. The poop flags disappeared. The spreadsheet was taken offline. Cato slowly stopped meeting. Turns out most of them just wanted an excuse to gossip. Linda still won't look me in the eye, but I think that's a win. And me? I still walk Baxter twice a day. I still pick up his poop. And sometimes, just sometimes, I walk past a lawn, pause dramatically, and whisper, remember the war. TIFU by accidentally destroying a family heirloom and blaming it on a ghost. This happened a few years ago, but it still haunts me, pun unfortunately intended. For context, I was 25, broke, newly single, and had just moved into my grandma's old house after she passed. The place was a creaky, two-story colonial nightmare built sometime before indoor plumbing was considered a human right. But hey, free rent is free rent. My family was super sentimental about this house. My mom grew up there, and my grandma had refused to sell it even when the neighborhood went from quaint to you'll get stabbed for your copper pipes. When she passed, my mom couldn't bring herself to sell it either, so she offered it to me, hoping someone would keep it in the family and fill it with love again. I agreed mostly because I had $43 to my name and a roommate who thought deodorant was a government conspiracy. The house came fully furnished with antique everything. I'm talking clawfoot bathtubs, chandeliers older than the Eiffel Tower, and creepy-ass porcelain dolls that I'm 85% sure were just waiting for nightfall to steal my soul. Among these antiques was a massive wooden grandfather clock that sat at the base of the stairs. This thing was the pride of the family, imported from Germany in the early 1900s, hand-carved, passed down for generations. My grandma used to polish it every Sunday like it was the Ark of the Covenant. So naturally, I forgot about it within the first week. Until one fateful Friday night. I had just discovered the joy of edible THC gummies, which is to say, I had just discovered how to ruin my own life from the comfort of my couch. I took one gummy thinking, how strong could it be, and chased it with a warm IPA. 20 minutes later, I was in orbit. Not fun, giggly orbit. I was in why is my ceiling breathing territory. Everything felt off. The lights were too bright, my skin felt like it was made of sandpaper, and I could swear I heard footsteps upstairs, even though I lived alone. Then the clock started chiming. I had heard it before, obviously, it went off every hour. But Jaime was convinced this was no ordinary chime. This was a summoning. It felt like the clock was trying to tell me something ancient and terrible. It echoed through the house like the final toll of doom. I stood up, wobbling, heart racing, trying to remember how to breathe like a normal mammal. I stumbled toward the kitchen, but in my THC-fueled panic, I took a wrong turn and ended up at the base of the stairs. Right in front of the clock. It loomed over me. Its pendulum swung side to side like it was judging me for my life choices. The chimes had stopped, but I could still feel them vibrating in my bones. I don't know what possessed me, maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was the gummy, or maybe it was just good old-fashioned stupidity, but I decided the clock was haunted. And I needed to end it. There was a broom leaning against the wall. I grabbed it like a sword and, swear to God, started yelling at the clock like it was a demon that had taken root in my home. I don't remember everything I said, but I'm pretty sure it involved quoting The Exorcist and threatening it with holy Febreze. Then I hit it. Hard. The first whack took off a decorative wooden flourish near the top. The second broke the glass door that covered the pendulum. And the third, well, the third made the whole thing tip forward like a Jenga tower from hell. It came crashing down with a sound I can only describe as final. The pendulum snapped. The inner workings spilled out like clock guts. One of the weights rolled into the hallway like it was trying to escape the scene of the crime. I stared at the wreckage, slowly sobering up through a mix of adrenaline and raw terror. I had just destroyed the most valuable and beloved item in my entire family. And I had done it while shouting Latin gibberish at it like an idiot. I did what any sane adult would do. I screamed, "Oh my God, what was that?" and ran outside like I was being chased by poltergeists. I called my mom, still pretending to be horrified, and told her I thought the house was haunted because something just knocked over Grandma's clock. She arrived the next morning with sage, holy water, and a family friend who claimed to be sensitive to spiritual energy. I stuck to my story like glue. I swore I had just been watching TV when the chimes started going crazy, and then bam, it toppled over all on its own. To my absolute horror, the psychic lady nodded sagely and said, "I feel a strong, angry presence here. Something old. Something unsettled." My mom, wide-eyed and deeply Catholic, decided the ghost must have been my grandpa, upset that the house was now occupied by a single guy with no wife or kids and questionable hygiene. She made me keep a candle burning near the clock remains to calm his spirit. I played along for weeks, even made up stories about cold spots and whispers. I felt awful, but what was I supposed to do? Hey Mom, turns out the ghost was just me on edibles with the reflexes of a blindfolded rhino? Eventually, the broken clock was moved to the garage and covered with a tarp until we can find someone to repair it. It never got repaired. 2 years later, during a family move, it was quietly donated to an antique salvage place, where it probably now serves as kindling for bougie fireplace displays. To this day, no one knows the truth. But sometimes I lie awake at night and hear the faint ticking of a phantom pendulum, mocking me. TIFU by accidentally sending my entire extended family a photo of me wearing my girlfriend's lingerie. This happened last weekend and I'm still debating whether or not to start a new life in a remote fishing village with no internet access. Some background: I'm a 29-year-old guy, pretty laid back, with a tight group of friends and a slightly chaotic sense of humor. My girlfriend, Rachel, is even more chaotic, and part of our fun as a couple is messing with each other in increasingly weird and absurd ways. Think prank wars with high production value, notes left in my lunch that say things like "this sandwich is laced with regret," or drawing faces on all the eggs in the fridge. A couple weeks ago, we went to a bachelorette party for one of Rachel's friends. One of the games was this ridiculous dare roulette, and her dare was to buy the tackiest, most outrageous piece of lingerie she could find and then dare me to wear it and send her a pic. I lost a bet that night, so I followed through. The result was a full-body mirror selfie of me in a bright red lace teddy that barely covered anything, with a come-hither look on my face that still haunts me. I'd never felt both so ashamed and so attractive at the same time. Anyway, fast forward to this past Saturday. My family was having a big Zoom party for my grandmother's 80th birthday. She's this sweet, tiny Italian woman who still bakes bread every week and mails us all socks for Christmas. As part of the celebration, we had all been contributing to a big shared digital photo album with Google Photos, pictures of Grandma, pictures of us growing up, funny videos, anything nostalgic or touching. I had about 200 photos I wanted to upload, some from a family reunion in 2015, some childhood stuff, and a few old scanned photos I'd found in a dusty box. I sorted them into a folder on my computer and did a bulk upload to the shared album, feeling all proud and sentimental. An hour later, my phone started buzzing. First it was a text from my cousin Gina, BRO. "Go check the album. Now." Then one from my aunt, "I don't think that last photo was meant for the family album." And then the cherry on top, a message from my dad that just said, "Interesting choice of attire, son." I opened the album and there it was. Smack in the middle of wholesome childhood photos and Grandma blowing out candles in 1996, me. In a red lace teddy. posing like a Victoria's Secret model who has made deeply questionable life choices. I must have accidentally dragged it into the upload folder when I was organizing things. You know how thumbnails are small and you're clicking fast and not paying attention? That's my only excuse. But it was there. Full screen. High res. Timestamped. Everything. I instantly panicked. My brain did that thing where it locks up and just shows you a mental screensaver that says error 404. I removed the photo within 45 seconds of seeing it, but the damage had already been done. At least 5 people had screenshotted it. My cousin Matt put it in our family group chat and added a cowboy hat emoji, for reasons I don't understand but somehow made it worse. The next 10 minutes were a blur of incoming notifications and my soul leaving my body. My sister called me laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. My Uncle Joe, who hasn't spoken to me since the Trump era, just sent a thumbs up, and my grandmother, sweet, oblivious Nana, sent a voice message saying, "You looked very theatrical, dear." I wanted to vomit into the sun. The real kicker? Rachel saw all this go down in real time. She was over at my place, sitting on the couch watching Bridgerton, and I just slowly turned to her and whispered, "I think I just destroyed my entire bloodline." When I explained what happened, she howled. Actual tears. She laughed so hard she slid off the couch. She now refers to me exclusively as Giselle. Later that night, we were all still on the Zoom call for the birthday party, trying to pretend that nothing had happened. People were being way too nice to me, which somehow made it worse. My dad said, "I always knew you had a flair for drama," and my mom kept bringing up how confident I seemed in the photo. Even Nana said, "Maybe next time we do a Halloween party, you wear that one, eh?" I died. I'm writing this from beyond the grave. The photo is now immortalized. My cousins have already threatened to use it as a Christmas card unless I comply with a list of ridiculous demands, which includes performing a dramatic reading of Twilight at our next family gathering. In hindsight, it's honestly a miracle that this is the first time something like this has happened to me, given my general lack of tech caution and my overconfidence in multitasking. I've since deleted all incriminating photos off my desktop, triple-checked every folder, and created a safe for family album that is aggressively sanitized. As for the lingerie, Rachel has it back, and she wore it that night to console me. I could almost enjoy it, except every time I saw it, I just heard my dad's voice in my head saying, "Interesting choice of attire." I don't know if I'll ever live it down, but I suppose if your worst screw-up gives your entire family a reason to laugh together, it's not the worst legacy. Still, next time someone says upload some cute family photos, I'm hiring an intern to do it. I've always been pretty proud of my ability to keep things together in stressful situations. I can stay calm, think through the problem, and get stuff done. So when I agreed to help my best friend, Sarah, with her wedding, I figured it would be a breeze. After all, I've been in a few weddings, helped plan some events, and my organizational skills are top-notch. Little did I know, I was about to be in the middle of a wedding day disaster that would haunt me for years. It all started a few months before the wedding. Sarah and her fiancé, Jack, had been planning their dream wedding for almost a year. They were going all out of venue, flowers, catering, and even hiring a live band for the reception. Sarah, being the type A person she is, was hands-on in every aspect of the planning. But when it came time to choose a maid of honor, she asked me, of course. We've been best friends since college, and I was honored that she wanted me to stand by her side on her big day. The first big task that came up was planning the bridal shower. I took charge of organizing everything, as expected. I sent out the invites, coordinated with the venue, and ensured all the decorations were ordered. I even made sure the food was taken care of. I was on top of it all, until the day of the shower. I got up early that morning to help set up. I arrived at the venue hours before the guests were expected to arrive, and everything was going according to plan. The decorations were looking great, the food was being delivered, and the drinks were being prepped. But then, about an hour before the party started, I received a call from the catering company. "Hey, we've got a bit of a problem," the woman on the phone said. "The cake you ordered was mistakenly sent to a different event, and it won't be here in time for the shower." I froze. The cake was the centerpiece of the entire shower. Sarah had requested a custom design, and it had taken weeks of planning with the baker. Without it, I was going to be in huge trouble. I told the woman on the phone that this wasn't an option and demanded she find a solution. After some back and forth, she told me she could send a replacement cake from a different bakery, but it would be much smaller and wouldn't be the custom design Sarah had requested. I didn't have time to argue. I said yes and hung up the phone. I spent the next few minutes pacing back and forth, trying to figure out how to fix this. The cake was a huge deal to Sarah, and I couldn't let this ruin her bridal shower. I quickly got on the phone with a few friends who lived nearby to ask if they could pick up a backup cake from another bakery. My plan was to have them grab the new cake, bring it to the venue, and replace the one that wasn't going to arrive in time. It seemed like the best solution, and I was feeling somewhat optimistic. But as I'm frantically trying to solve the cake crisis, disaster strikes again. One of the decorations, a large balloon arch that was supposed to be the focal point of the entrance, collapsed. I have no idea how it happened. I had double-checked everything earlier, but it looked like the arch wasn't properly secured, and now it was a pile of twisted plastic and broken ties. I ran over to try and fix it, but the more I tried, the worse it got. I was getting more and more panicked, and every time I looked around, something else was going wrong. The music wasn't working, the catering staff was running late, and one of the bridesmaids had a wardrobe malfunction. It felt like everything I touched was falling apart. By the time the guests started to arrive, I was in full-blown panic mode. The balloon arch was half fixed, though it still looked terrible. The backup cake had arrived and was barely big enough to serve everyone, and the food was a little more on the okay side than I'd hoped for. But I smiled through it all. I greeted the guests, pretended everything was fine, and tried my best to make sure Sarah had a good time. She seemed a little distracted, but I assumed she just had the normal pre-wedding nerves. The bridal shower went on, and somehow, it didn't turn into a total disaster. But by the end of the day, I was exhausted. I had managed to pull it together, but I knew I hadn't done a great job. I tried to go over every little detail in my head, trying to figure out what I could have done differently, but it was hard to focus when I had so many other things on my plate. A few days later, Sarah called me. I was expecting a thank you for all the work I had done for the shower, but instead, she sounded a little upset. "Hey, can we talk?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I had a bad feeling. I agreed to meet up, and when I sat down with her, she hit me with something I was not prepared for. "So, I've been hearing from a few of the guests about the shower," she said, her tone serious. "And I'm a little disappointed in how it all went." My heart sank. I immediately started thinking back to everything that went wrong: the cake, the balloon arch, the food, the music. I tried to explain everything, but Sarah interrupted me. "It's not just that," she said. "It's the way you acted. You were stressed, and it kind of set the tone for the whole event. I'm not saying you didn't try, but it felt like you weren't there emotionally. It felt like you were trying to keep everything together for yourself instead of for me." I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. I had worked so hard, and I thought I was doing everything I could to help. But hearing her say that made me realize that maybe I had been so focused on fixing the logistical problems that I hadn't been present for her, the way I should have been. After that conversation, I spent a long time reflecting. I realized that while I had been so focused on being the perfect maid of honor, I had lost sight of the most important part of my role, being there for Sarah. I hadn't been emotionally supportive in the way she needed, and that had affected her big day. To make it right, I did everything I could to apologize. I took her out to dinner and promised her I would be more present in the future, not just in the planning, but emotionally as well. I also offered to help with the wedding itself, but Sarah, being the gracious person she is, assured me she didn't hold any of it against me. Looking back on it, I realized that I had completely messed up, but in the end, it was a valuable lesson. Sometimes, in the chaos of trying to manage everything, you can forget the most important thing: supporting the people you love, even if it means letting go of the need to control every detail. The wedding went off without a hitch, and Sarah had the day she wanted. But I'll always remember the bridal shower disaster, and how, in trying to do everything perfectly, I almost lost sight of what really mattered. TIFU by attempting to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and nearly burning down my apartment in the process. So, I've been dating my girlfriend, Emily, for a little over a year now. We've had our ups and downs, but things have been going well lately. I decided that I wanted to do something special for her, a romantic dinner, just the two of us. Now, I'm not exactly the most skilled cook, but I figured I could handle a basic meal and impress her with my thoughtfulness. I had this grand idea that I'd make a home-cooked dinner and surprise her with a beautiful candlelit evening. What could go wrong, right? I started planning a few days ahead of time, looking up recipes and getting all the ingredients I would need. I chose a classic, chicken Alfredo. It seemed simple enough, and I figured she would love it. Plus, I could throw in a side salad and some garlic bread to make it feel more like an authentic Italian dinner. I wasn't just going to cook in my usual throw everything together style. No, I wanted this to be special. I researched ways to make everything taste like it came straight from a 5-star restaurant. I spent the entire day buying fresh ingredients: chicken breast, cream, parmesan, garlic, herbs, the works. I even got a nice bottle of wine to pair with the meal. The goal was to make this a flawless evening. I was on a mission. I made sure my apartment was spotless. I lit a few scented candles, placed them in strategic spots, and dimmed the lights to set the mood. Everything was coming together perfectly. I was feeling pretty proud of myself, too, like I had this whole thing in the bag. I set the table with her favorite plates and even found some fancy napkins to add an extra touch of elegance. Now, here's where things start to go sideways. I started cooking the chicken first, searing it in a hot pan to get that perfect golden brown crust. I was so focused on getting that just right that I didn't notice how quickly the pan was heating up. The oil started to smoke. I was a little panicked, but I figured if I just turned the heat down a bit, everything would be fine. Big mistake. I turned down the heat and continued with the chicken. That's when I moved on to the next part, making the Alfredo sauce. I had everything ready to go: heavy cream, garlic, butter, and, of course, the Parmesan. I was feeling like a pro at this point. I melted the butter in the pan and added the garlic, letting it cook just enough to bring out that lovely aroma. Then I poured in the cream and started to whisk everything together. But then, I realized I had been so focused on the chicken and sauce that I completely forgot about the garlic bread in the oven. I quickly ran to the kitchen to check, only to find that it was starting to burn. Panicking, I pulled the bread out, but it was already charred beyond recognition. So much for impressing her with a perfect side dish. I threw it away, trying to act like it was no big deal, but deep down I was internally screaming. Back to the sauce. I was whisking away, trying to salvage what was left of my dinner plans, when I noticed that the sauce was starting to thicken too quickly. The heat in the pan was still too high, and now the cream was rapidly reducing. I frantically tried to adjust, but it was too late. The sauce had turned into something that could only be described as a congealed mess. At this point, I was sweating bullets. The chicken was still cooking in the pan, and the sauce had solidified into a weird, globby mass. I had to make a decision: abandon the sauce and salvage the chicken, or start over and risk ruining everything. I opted for the former, hoping that I could somehow save this disaster with a little creativity. I ran to the fridge and grabbed some jarred Alfredo sauce. At this point, I didn't care. I just wanted to get something edible on the table. I poured it into the pan, hoping that the combination of the jarred sauce and the remnants of the homemade sauce would somehow blend together into something passable. And then, disaster struck. The oil in the pan, which had been smoking earlier, suddenly burst into flames. I swear, it was like something out of a movie. The fire shot up, and for a split second, I just froze. My brain couldn't process what was happening. I had never been in a situation like this before. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a towel. I waved it around like a madman, trying to smother the flames. It did absolutely nothing. The fire was growing. My heart was racing, and I realized I needed to act fast. The last thing I wanted was to burn down my apartment and have to explain that to Emily. In a panic, I grabbed the fire extinguisher I thankfully had under the sink. I pulled the pin, aimed it at the base of the fire, and squeezed the handle. A loud burst of foam shot out, and within seconds, the flames were extinguished. My kitchen looked like a disaster zone, with white foam covering the countertops, the floor, and, somehow, my shirt. I was standing there, wide-eyed, my heart still pounding, covered in foam, and completely out of breath when Emily walked in. She had been running a little late, so I thought I had more time. But there she was, standing in the doorway, taking in the chaos that had unfolded in my kitchen. Her eyes went from the fire extinguisher, to the blackened chicken, to the half-burnt garlic bread, to me standing there looking like a failed chemistry experiment. She didn't say anything at first. The silence was almost unbearable. Then, she burst out laughing. And I mean, laughing hard, like she couldn't breathe. I stood there, not knowing whether to laugh along with her or just apologize for the catastrophe that had unfolded. Eventually, through her giggles, she managed to say, I think we should just order pizza. So, we did. We spent the night laughing at my failed attempt at cooking and eating pizza while I tried to salvage what little dignity I had left. But in the end, Emily told me that even though the dinner didn't go as planned, she appreciated the effort. And I guess that's the important part, right? So, yeah. TIFU by thinking I could cook a fancy dinner, nearly burned my apartment down, and ended up with pizza. Definitely not the romantic evening I had envisioned. Moral of the story, next time, I'm sticking to takeout. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.